Taxing the rich will not eliminate the wealth gap. There's two kind of think pieces people come out with this whole taxing thing, and I want to talk about that. Number one being that people just think if you tax the rich, all of a sudden everybody's problems are going to be solved. False, right? And then another thing is that they think that because they tax the rich, they won't have to pay for anything. Also extremely false. I want to get into why those things will not solve any real problems and what we can do to actually solve the problem of the wealth gap. So make sure you stick around for all that and more. It's Crystal with the Cash Compass. All right, welcome back. I am here to teach you all the things that you should have learned in school about money, but for whatever reason they forgot to mention it. Please be sure to subscribe because we talk about everything from personal finance to investing to the economy. Let's get into it. All right, I have seen endless comments over the internet talking about Joe Biden's tax plan. Most people saying if you don't make $400,000 a year, you shouldn't be worried about it. Wrong. You should be very worried about it. And this is not to, this is not a political channel. I don't talk politics. I just talk about the money because I think politics is basically money, but that's a whole different topic for a whole nother video. But let's talk about this whole concept of taxing people who make over $400,000. Biden literally said that he wants to reverse Trump's tax plan. And if he does reverse the tax plan, your income taxes will go up, okay? Because within Trump's tax plan, he did cut income taxes. So I don't know if people are just thinking that they're just above this because they are below the income, right? Like, no. Like, anybody can get it. Now, we don't know if he really intends to reverse the entire Trump plan because he's not going back to the old corporate taxes. He's kind of having some sort of hybrid. So it's still cut relative to what it was prior to Trump entering office, but it's just not going to be as low as it is now, right? So maybe he won't raise income taxes, but that doesn't mean we're out of the clear yet. We have to constantly remember that people are running businesses, okay? And if you have your own business, or if you are an accountant like me and you get to kind of be in these meetings where they're talking about the business plan, and they're looking out into the future, these people, their main concern is cutting expenses, cutting costs, and increasing revenue, right? They want that bottom line to grow year over year, because if you don't grow year over year, you're probably not going to get people trying to invest into you. Actually, I take that back, because there's companies like Uber who hasn't made $1 of profit and yet people still bought the stock. So in this day and age, maybe that's not necessarily true. But what I'm trying to say is, you want, no matter what, you want to be on the up and up, right? Like most people, even at the individual level, you want to be making more money, not less money, right? So that's the same mentality that these businesses have. So if they are getting a increase in taxes, well, guess what? That means less income for you, right? They're not going to raise the income for their workers, or maybe they'll pass that on through their products or their services. So now you're going to be paying more for things that you already pay a lot for, right? And that's not just unique with taxes, right? Anything that the government imposes on the employer means it's less money that they can give back to their employees and less money that they can kind of save for their customers. What do I mean by that? Let's take, Social Security or Medicare or unemployment, or even like your healthcare, right? Companies that have to pay for your healthcare and cover all these expenses, that's less money that can go into your pocket, right? Because instead of paying you directly, they have to pay the government all these different taxes. They have to pay for your health insurance, and that just means less money that they can give to you outright. Now, some will argue that is what they want, right? They want health insurance. Maybe they can get a better deal if their employer is the one that actually pays for these things. But we'll actually really never know, because we haven't had an opportunity to see, at least in current history, what that would look like. But that's off topic. I know people are going to say, oh, that's not necessarily true. Just because, you're a corporation and you want to have a bigger bottom line, that doesn't necessarily mean it will come through, less income for the worker, or more expenses for the consumer, right? Okay, fine. Let's say this. Let's just assume that Joe Biden doesn't tax anybody under $400,000, right? And let's assume that the businesses and the corporations, they don't transfer those expenses into our pocket, right? Like they'll just eat up all those costs and they'll have a smaller bottom line. You're still gonna be paying more taxes. I want to make this really clear, and I say this enough times, but some people are new to this channel, so I want to repeat this. Out of all the income, right? Out of all the income that the government gets from us through taxes, only 15% comes from corporations, okay? So even if they are applying these taxes to high income earners and to corporations raising their income taxes, that doesn't really do a lot because they do not make up but a fraction of the total income for the government. And if you didn't know, the government runs enormous deficits year after year, month after month, literally minute per minute. They are spending like billions of dollars per day, quite literally, right? So they're still short. They can tax all the people who make all this money, you know, higher taxes, and they're still not going to be able to make up the difference because we, the people, are really who make up the majority of the government's income. So now I reach a point where it's like, okay, we need to spend more, right? Because pandemic, there's been a lot more expenses. The stimulus package was trillions of dollars extra just this year alone. So they have to spend a little bit more. They're not going to tax us, right? Because we don't want our taxes to go up. They're going to tax the rich, but the rich have tax shelters, right? They know how to hide their money. If it's not clear by them only providing 15% of total revenue for the government, I don't know how else to make it clear for you, right? So they're hiding their money. They have tax havens. They know the tax code very well. So what is the government to do? They have to borrow money, okay? Whether it's from us, from other countries, or from the Federal Reserve, they're borrowing money. They are issuing bonds. And guess who pays the interest on those bonds? We do. So raising taxes for the rich, I think, does something to people's mental, right? It sounds good. Like, yeah, let's stick it to the man. Like, let's charge them more. But I don't know that it makes a significant difference. And I know for a damn sure fact that it does not decrease the wealth gap, right? Because they just get creative. So if we really want to reduce the wealth gap, what can we do? We would honestly need to just, you know, middle finger to the system, right? Like, we would need to say, we're not participating in the system anymore. I'm good, love, enjoy, and I'm out, right? We would need to fully remove ourselves from the system. And let me explain what I mean by that. This is actually a cool fun fact, right? So when we talk about the wealth gap, you could be talking about one of two things. You could be talking about it from an income perspective, right? Like, oh, these people make more money than these people. Or you can be talking about it from a net worth perspective, which I think is what most people associate the wealth gap with, right? Like, these people are just becoming wealthier and wealthier. When you hear about the uber rich becoming uber richer, like Elon Musk, for example, who just kind of shot his way up to the second richest man alive or in the world, that's net worth they're talking about, right? Not necessarily income, because we know Tesla is not a huge income producing company, right? So it's net worth we're talking about. And net worth versus income is quite interesting because the income gap is actually not that dramatic, right? Because your income can only go to zero. And if you found a way to make negative income, let's talk, because you special. Income can only go to zero, right? But net worth can and absolutely does go negative. So what we have is a lot of people, especially if you went to college and you didn't have, you know, you weren't afforded like a free scholarship or some sort of grant or whatever, you're coming out in the negatives, right? So you have to climb out of that hole. And when you climb out of that hole and you're finally on level ground, you're like, all right, I'm not in debt anymore. Like, let's see what I could do. You're met with low interest rates, nothing that you can really put your money in risk-free, right? Because all the risk-free assets are offering negligible interest rates, and if you adjust for inflation, you're actually paying them, right? So you're met with nothing but having to take on more risk and get into more sophisticated things just to kind of get on top. So when we participate in that system, we contribute to the wealth gap, because people who are sophisticated, who are afforded CPAs and they have that business know-how, they can continue to climb and make their assets work for them. And when they put that money into their next generation, well, they're starting off up here, while some people are starting off down in the negatives because they are saddled with debt. So how do we get out of this? How do we eliminate the wealth gap? We can't participate, okay? Anytime we get ourselves involved with the bank, we are participating in a system that is designed to fail people. I've said this before, I will say it again. The banks have a 0% reserve requirement, okay? They honestly don't need your money, and that's kind of why I think they can also offer dirt cheap interest rates or dirt low interest rates, because they don't need your money, okay? There's a 0% reserve requirement, so they don't have to have any money of yours in the bank. They can take your money and loan it out a million times over for all we care. Outside of that, when you do take on a loan, they create that money on the spot. They did not have the $10,000 in the bank just waiting for you to come take it. A lot of times, more times than not, they create that money, or at least a portion of that money is created because you walked in there and decided that you wanted a loan, okay? So now what? You want $10,000? Here's $10,000. But guess what? You owe us $10,500 after the loan is through. But they didn't make the money for the $500, okay? So this system is designed to create losers. It's designed to have people's wealth zapped from them, because somebody's gonna be left holding the bag, right? Musical chairs, somebody's gonna be left standing up and there's gonna be no chairs for them to sit down on, right? Because eventually it'll reach a point where, okay, I need to make this interest payment and my principal payment, but there is no money out there for that. Right? Like, there's going to always be winners and losers. That is what the system is designed to do. It's mathematically impossible for every single person in this world to have their bills paid on time. It's impossible. So if we want to really change the wealth gap, we would have to not participate in that, right? We'd have to say, no thank you to banks. We're going to become our own central banks. And that's through having your own currency, like your gold and your silver. Different topic. I don't want to kind of get into that, because I don't want to make this video too long, but you just pull yourself out of the system, right? Outside of the banking system, which I think is just completely flawed, intangible assets, right? They can create assets on top of assets, and they just create derivatives of different assets. So they could have once had a regular mortgage loan, right? They took your mortgage loan, they threw it into some other mortgage loans, wrapped it up in a bow, and they sold that off into pieces, right? So now everybody has a piece of your mortgage. That's an intangible asset. They are not eligible to take your house from you, right? So it provides very little downside to the bankers, right? Because especially when it's like a CLO or a CDO, these are collateralized loan debt obligations or debt obligations. Don't want to get too complicated, but those things are normally non-recourse, meaning that they can get a loan from you. It could be a terrible loan for all they care. They're going to just package it up and sell it off to some random person. And if the person who had the mortgage didn't pay that rent, guess what? The bank has nothing to do with that, because they already sold it to you. You're the one holding the bag, okay? So it's very, very, very little downside for the banking system, and very much so an upside for them, right? Because they sell it off, they get their fees, and they bounce. And if your mortgage, that person doesn't pay that mortgage, well, then you're out of luck, and you got to figure out what you got to do, right? These are all these derivative assets, these intangible assets. If we, keep on playing that game, that's how wealth just kind of keeps on increasing for the uber rich, because they know how to get their way out of things, right? They know how to say, okay, I want to invest in this, but I don't want to have any downside. So I'm going to have it in a situation where you can't come back to me if there's a problem. So you have to pull yourself out of that system. But it's like, come on, most people have that kind of mentality. It's like, okay, if you can't beat them, join them, right? Like, I know for a fact that we're probably never going to reach a point where we have full banking, right? Like 100% reserve requirement banking, where it's like, if I put in $100, I have to have your $100, right? We're not going to do that, because people have already got a taste of what it's like to just kind of loan money out for no reason and with no backing and no support, right? This money is created literally out of thin air, and for us to go back to a system where it's like, okay, you have to be responsible. You cannot overloan. You have to actually make sure that the loans that you're giving out make sense. No, that's just not feasible. I don't think it's ever going to happen. So most people are just like, forget it. I want to play the game too. I want to learn about these assets. I want to make investments in stocks and bonds, and I want to have, different investment securities and have, an investment fund or whatever. So we just play the game, right? And I get that too. People do that from a political standpoint also. Like, when the elections came, they didn't like Biden or Trump, but they're like, whatever, I'll pick the lesser of two evils, because if you can't beat them, join them. If that's your mentality, then there is a way to kind of reduce the wealth gap that way also. Like I said, the majority of the wealth gap actually comes from net worth, not income, right? So you should always be trying to work on getting your income increased, right? And like have better skills that demand a higher salary, of course. Or you should be working on getting your own business, right? Because we always are trained to be workers, but you should be creating your own content, and every single dollar and every single piece of work that you put in there, every hour, every minute of work goes right back to you, right? But at any rate, just really being educated on the dangers of debt, not getting into debt, practicing self-discipline, and teaching others to do the same. If you have kids, you teach them, like, listen, you don't want to get into debt unless it's going to be making you money, right? So if I'm going to buy a property but I'm renting it out, that makes sense. If I'm going to be buying, shoes and I'm putting it on my credit card, not the most sensible thing, right? So it just goes back down to education and having discipline and just really watching what these people do and copying them, right? Like, let's beat them, or at least compete with them in their own game. But like I said, it's still the system that is flawed, right? So there's always going to be winners and losers. You have to just make sure you're not the one holding the bag, but somebody's going to hold the bag, right? So the system is really what needs to be the change, but at least if you can manage, because it doesn't seem like we're going to get rid of the system at all, at least if you can manage and you can teach people around you, then we'll make sure we're the ones not holding the bag. But let me know what you guys think. Do you guys think that income taxes, you know, or taxes on the rich really do make a dramatic difference? I want to hear from you, so let me know. But that will do it. If you like this video, then please like this video and share it with your friends. And if you have anything else going on, you know what to do. Go ahead and binge watch me. And until next time, keep your money up.